BMWs from the mid-1990s to the mid-2000s are widely considered as some of the best cars BMW has ever made. This era of BMW is often called the Golden Era and features BMW models like the E39, E36, E46, and especially their high-performance M versions. There's an endless number of restoration, review, and driving videos on these cars despite being over 20 years old. Like many of you, I've always been fond of classic BMWs, but I've gotten curious about how their legacy persists in newer models. To answer this question, I enlisted the help of my good friend Nico, who owns a beautiful, mint-condition and stock E39 540i manual. Apart from being a long-time E39 owner, Nico has driven other BMW classics like the E46 and E36 3 Series, and some newer models like the G23 Series, F80 M3, and F22 M240i, making him the ideal person to consult. He will be driving my stock 2018 BMW 230i manual, and we're going to find out how a 2018 BMW and more modern BMWs in general compare to BMWs from the Golden Era. Let's drive into the comparison.
The looks, first of all, the looks predominantly, I think they're great to drive. They have character, they have a personality. I think for me, the appeal for older cars or the golden era is really the looks and the personality and the way that they handle. Now that you look at this car, this is actually somewhat of a classic setup because you still have traditional gauges, you still have buttons, you have the manual transmission. Ergonomically speaking, this is fantastic. Everything is driver oriented. Granted, the new cars are still driver oriented, but compared to my E39, for example, or E46s, where the climate buttons were all the way down here, you always have to look down to see which button. Like, I've had the car for 7 years now, and I still have to look down to see what I am operating. Whereas a lot of people are quick to bash the new iDrive system, iDrive 8, the one that has, you know, just the straight television or iPad style. But it's actually, everything is eye level. To the press of one button, you have all the climate controls, and you don't have to really take your eyes off of the street. And most people leave the climate control on auto anyways. I think this is one of the areas where the older generation just did it better, period. I've driven some of the, I guess some of the best or some of the sportiest handling modern BMWs that BMW has to offer, including the new M3, the previous generation M2 Competition, M240, 230, some really sporty offerings. I think despite all the modes that you can play around with, steering and sport, steering comfort, sport mode this, sport mode that, I think that the analog hydraulic steering, it's still the most communicative. When you're driving a modern BMW, no matter what kind of BMW it is, M car, non-M car, whatever, you're always feeling as though you're steering something or some computer is sending the information to the wheels and the wheels are responding. Now in reality, it doesn't feel that slow, but it's just, it's a different feeling driving any car in general, not just BMW, but any car with hydraulic steering. In general, I find that a lot of the modern cars have a lot of rev hang. This one has a lot. Now, getting the M240, which I had, does fix the problem. That car does not suffer of any rev hang. The 540, I don't notice any rev hang. Like, this one takes like, you know, like a good 2 seconds or so for the revs to drop so that I can shift into the next gear. Like, I will try to demonstrate. You can, right? Can, but you have to ride the clutch a little bit more to make it smoother. I think I got lucky on that chance. It was pretty smooth. I wasn't expecting it to be that smooth. So it has been a while since I've driven this car, and I forgot how good it sounds. I mean, it is in sport mode currently. I don't know, I think it has some piped-in audio. I don't mind piped-in audio. It's well done. Now, I am definitely a modern BMW guy when it comes to sound. For instance, in my 540, the engine is barely audible. It's completely stock, so is this car, but it's barely audible, and to the point where I remember when I would switch from my M240, same generation F22 as this one, I would come in this car and I wouldn't hear a thing. it was so quiet in comparison to my M240. But today, as I'm switching from 540 E39 to this car suddenly comes alive and I can hear the sound. It's fantastic. I think 6 cylinders are the sweet spot for me, for BMWs, and even just in general, just because of the balance that they provide for the sound. Like, they sound good when you're driving regularly, just like right now, or when you're really pushing the car. They sound great at the top end as well. Now, 4 cylinders, which that's what we're in right now, the B48. Some may say, oh, you don't get a BMW with a 4-cylinder engine. That's just a no-no. And that's an opinion that even I had. Until I drove a G20 330i, so the current generation 330. And I have to say, the latest from BMW in terms of 4-cylinder engines have been fantastic. My dad had a 330, current generation. I had an M240, F22. I had to kind of look to see which one was driving by. Sometimes when my dad would take either car in the neighborhood and was just passing by and my windows were open, I had to look because that's how good that B48 sounded. But yeah, BMW has really improved their 4-cylinder game. I would still pick a 6-cylinder, but I wouldn't discount this car or any 4-cylinder BMW just because, oh, it's a 4-cylinder. But no, it's really, the BMW 4-cylinders are really throaty and I think sound great. The other thing I wanted to talk about is the shifter, because ever since BMW has been using these shifters, they have been like much better than like anything that an E46 or E39 had, even full M cars, M3s, M5s. Like, this is, yes, this is a 230, this is a way better shifter than like what the E39 M5 or E46 M3 came with. Now, once again, stock for stock. The first time I drove it was coming off of an M240, same generation, F22, 6-speed manual as well. Now, that first impression compared to today is vastly different. Why? Because the M240i is a more visceral experience compared to this car. From the startup, the suspension, the steering, even the shifter, you feel a lot more like engine vibrations from the shifter in that car than this car. So my first impression then was that this was just a very comfortable, soft vehicle in terms of everything, like a clutch engagement, the shifter, the suspension, steering, everything. It's still a very comfortable car, but coming from an E39 540i today, 6-speed, this feels like definitely a much sportier offering. Like, the suspension is a lot tighter. It's still very comfortable. Yeah, that was my first impression today, is that it's a much sportier offering. I mean, I remember driving this car, but today it was, I don't know if it's because it's been a while and since I've been only driving my E39, and yeah, this is very sporty compared to that car. Well, I have experience driving like fair amount, I would say, of, you know, more classic BMWs, E36, E46, E39, etc. And modern ones, you know, F series, G series, E90, etc. Compared to the classic cars, especially E36 or E46, I mean, really, steering feel, which in all modern BMWs is just, it's not always soft. Not the case. Actually, they can get pretty heavy, artificially heavy, but they can get pretty heavy when you put the vehicle in sport mode or sport plus or whatnot. But yeah, steering aside, the modern cars are superior cars, as I would expect. They're much more powerful, much more capable. I think it's, you know, in terms of the looks, right? I think older BMWs, especially like an E34 or E39 or E36, those that have been well taken care of have aged incredibly well. They're still very beautiful vehicles to look at, and I think they'll continue to look great for decades to come, and they'll continue to appreciate, perhaps not the modern BMWs. I think some of them, while they look good, they might be a little bit forgettable. It might take a long time for them to kind of appreciate or for them to be recognized as classics. Yeah, I think those two things, looks and just sometimes the handling, perhaps specifically the steering, the classic BMWs did better. Some people would also argue perhaps some maintenance items. I mean, for example, like a battery on an E39 from the dealership is $300 Canadian. A battery for like a G80 M3 is $2,500 currently at the dealership. So things like that. Not so much on the 4 or 6-cylinder engines, but on some of the newer V8s, there are some issues that are just straight unrepairable or that costs tens of thousands of dollars or something crazy like that. So perhaps Certain maintenance items were more straightforward or easier done or less computerized compared to the older BMWs. But then again, the older BMWs had other issues and will continue to have other issues as they age, such as rust, for example. That is something in Canada that is very important to consider because we get weather like this. We get salt on the road, right? But yeah, I would think to summarize, I think looks and perhaps the handling, specifically the steering. One thing that stands out to me that I don't understand why BMW doesn't give the option. You know, every car manufacturer is moving to screens. There are no more classic dials. That just does not exist anymore. But there's no reason why you can't design the screen for there to be an option, at least, to have those more classic round gauges. Mercedes has it, Audi has it. They have their weird options too, you know, and whatnot. But there's always an option to go to classic gauges. And I think BMW should do that because they were the best at it. You know, you look at the gauges from like an E46, E90 even. They was just so crystal clear. The font was perfect size. Like, they were wonderful. I think BMWs have always given options to the driver, and I think they should really continue to do that as best as they can.
A special thanks to Nico for sharing his thoughts and making some great comparisons between modern and classic BMWs. Ultimately, while newer BMWs have the superior technology, features, and in some ways handling, those classic BMWs have a unique, timeless design, superior steering feel, and a unique character. Both eras of BMWs have their pros and cons, but one thing's for sure, both eras have some truly amazing driver's cars. Thanks for watching, and hope you all enjoyed.